Still today, the broken wheel is one of the most horrible ways to kill someone. It was mostly only given to the worst offenders and was meant to cause the most pain and suffering, usually in front of a large crowd. People who were given this sentence were either broken by the wheel or broken on the wheel. In the first, the person being put to death was hit with a wheel, which broke their bones. In the second, the person being executed was tied to a wheel so that a cudgel could be used to break their bones one by one. After being hit, the victim was often left on the wheel for hours or even days, with their broken limbs stuck in the spokes of the wheel. As you might expect, they often died after a long time. The broken wheel was one of the cruelest and most savage ways to kill someone. It stopped being used in the 19th century, but the horrors it left behind are still as scary as ever. The breaking wheel in ancient Rome. As far back as the Roman Empire, during the time of the Emperor Commodus, son of Marcus Aurelius, the wheel was used as a method of execution. This practice dates back to the period of the Roman Empire. In his book, What a Way to Go, the guillotine, the pendulum, the thousand cuts, the Spanish donkey, and 66 other ways of putting someone to death, Geoffrey Abbott describes how the Romans utilized the wheel as a means of inflicting suffering on their victims. The condemned individual was restrained to a bench by the executioner, who then placed an iron-flanged wheel on top of their body. After that, they used a hammer to smash the wheel into the victim, beginning at the victim's ankles and working their way up to the victim's head. In the assumption that it would prevent the resurrection of the dead, the Romans frequently employed the wheel as a kind of punishment for slaves and Christians. Soon after, they came up with new embellishments for the wheel that was broken. According to what Abbott writes, victims were sometimes shackled to the wheel itself or around its circumference, or they were simply suspended vertically with their backs to the wheel. This latter illustration illustrates how executioners would occasionally start a fire beneath the wheel of the vehicle. The first-century Roman Jewish historian Titus Flavius Josephus described one such execution by the wheel, writing, "They fixed the prisoner about a great wheel, whereof the noble-hearted youth had all his joints dislocated and all his limbs broken. The whole wheel was stained with his blood." The Romans attempted to employ the breaking wheel as a form of torture on St. Catherine of Alexandria in the 4th century CE, which is considered to be one of the most terrible events in the history of the instrument. Catherine, who was a Christian and refused to forsake her beliefs, was glued to the wheel by those who were responsible for her execution. But after that, the wheel that was breaking broke apart. Infuriated by what appeared to be an act of supernatural intervention, Emperor Maxentius gave the order to behead Catherine. It is said that milk, and not blood, came out of her body at that moment. The wheel that broke eventually became known as the Wheel of Catherine, which is a nickname that was given to it. In spite of the passage of time, the breaking wheel remained to be utilized. As time went on, torture became a kind of punishment for a wide variety of offenses ranging from treason to murder, and it was no longer reserved for Christians or slaves. Breaking wheel torture during the Middle Ages. In the course of the Middle Ages, a great number of people all over Europe and in certain regions of Asia were sentenced to death by the means of the breaking wheel. As an illustration, a system that utilized the breaking wheel was in use in Zurich during the 15th century. According to the history collection, the victims were placed on a board with the wheel placed on their backs and then laid face down on the wooden surface. They were struck a total of 9 times, with 2 blows to each arm and leg, as well as 1 blow to the central nervous system. Subsequently, the victim's broken body was weaved between the spokes of the wheel, frequently while the victim was still experiencing life. After then, the wheel was fastened to a pole and driven into the ground, so exhibiting the victim who was in the process of passing away to anyone who happened to be passing by. As this was going on, executioners in France would frequently turn the wheel while the captives were attached to the outer perimeter of the facility. They would then strike the inmates with a cudgel as they completed each rotation. The number of strokes that they were subjected to was going to be decided by the court on an individual basis, with lesser transgressions resulting in 1 or 2 blows before they were put to death. A blow to the chest or neck that proved to be lethal was referred to as the coup de grâce, which literally translates to the blow of mercy. However, mercy did not come quickly to certain individuals. In the year 1581, a German serial killer by the name of Peter Niers was found guilty of 544 murders and ordered to be broken by the wheel. The executioners began with his ankles and gradually worked their way up, causing the most amount of suffering possible in order to guarantee that his punishment would be harsh. Over the course of 2 days, Niers was subjected to a total of 42 strikes before an attempt was made to quarter him alive. After they had received their allotted number of strikes, other convicts were frequently just placed on the wheel. They rarely lived for more than 3 days, and the majority of the time they passed away as a result of shock, dehydration, or an attack from an animal. As far as techniques of execution are concerned, the breaking wheel actually had a lengthy run, despite the fact that it appears to be antiquated and even rudimentary. Indeed, it was utilized all the way up until the 19th century. The wheel's final years in use. A significant amount of time following the end of the Middle Ages, the breaking wheel continued to be utilized as a way of execution in certain regions, such as France. Count Antoine de Horn and his friend, the Chevalier de Mille, were accused of murdering a man in a pub in Paris in the year 1720. This incident is considered to be one of the most notorious instances in which the breaking wheel was used. Under the guise of selling their victim shares worth 100,000 crowns, the 2 guys had scheduled a meeting with their victim, who was a share broker. On the other hand, they intended to steal from him. After being caught in the act by a servant who had entered the room, they attempted to flee, but they were eventually apprehended and sentenced to death. Their punishment, on the other hand, stirred up a great deal of controversy, as a great number of earls, dukes, bishops, and women petitioned with the authorities to spare de Horn from being executed. The pleadings were not heard by anyone. After being subjected to torture for the purpose of obtaining information, the Count de Horn and the Chevalier de Mille were eventually carried to the breaking wheel. Count de Horn, on the other hand, was put to death in a short amount of time, while de Mille was subjected to a lengthy period of torture before his executioner gave the final stroke. The last time the breaking wheel was used in France was in the year 1788. Nevertheless, it was still used in other areas of Europe and in certain regions of South America well into the 19th century of the century. It has, thankfully, fallen out of style in the modern era. However, for hundreds of years, the breaking wheel was considered to be one of the most gruesome ways of death that could possibly be imagined. In contrast to Catherine of Alexandria, the majority of people did not have the good fortune to have it collapse under their feet. Instead, they were left with fractured bones, and they prayed for a miracle to happen on their behalf.